Hello, scholars. Welcome back. Mr. Long here for World History 2. Today, we're going to be looking at how European imperialism during the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century is going to impact Asia and the Far East, with special emphasis on Japan and China. First event I'd like to talk about here is one of my favorite, one of my guilty pleasures when it comes to teaching history is the Opium Wars. This is a straight up drug war between Great Britain and China. So the story begins with the British fascination with tea. They really, really love their tea. It's still a stereotype that we have today. As Americans, we like to talk about the Boston Tea Party. Well, there's a reason that is such a big deal to the British and the American colonists. The British were buying massive amounts of tea from China, but China, who was economically self-sufficient, they didn't need to buy anything from the British to complete this trade. And so Britain was buying stuff from China, but not selling anything back, and it was causing what we call a trade deficit, where the two nations aren't equal trade partners. This is going to cause a problem for Britain because massive amounts of their silver from their economy is making its way to China and then not being traded back. British merchants were trying to figure out a way to balance that trade deficit. And one thing that they came up with is opium. Opium being the plant that heroin, the drug heroin, comes from. Well, the British controlled India and Pakistan and this part of the world down here, which grew opium in pretty sufficient quantities. And they wanted the tea from China. And so what they decided to do was try to get the Chinese addicted to opium, addicted to the drug, so that they would have no choice but to really buy all this opium from the British merchants. So already pretty shady, but when we're talking about European imperialism, this is a pretty fantastically awful tale for us to talk about. China fought against the drug trade, but Britain argued that they should have the freedom to trade whatever they want with the Chinese, even if that is a highly addictive and dangerous drug. So ethics conversation there if you really want to go down that road. The Chinese are going to the Chinese government cracks down on the opium trade. They're arresting British merchants and throwing the opium in the rivers and oceans, similar to how the Americans threw tea during the Boston Tea Party. And eventually war is going to break out between Great Britain and China. This war is fought mostly on the water, where the technologically advanced steel ships, not so much iron, well, yeah, the British had some ironclads, but more importantly, the steamships of the British Navy are going to be superior to the Chinese warships that were still wood and made from sail and didn't really have the firepower of the British ships. And so throughout the war, you have British steamships, including an ironclad or two, going up and down the rivers, just destroying anything in their path. And the Chinese really don't have anything technologically to counter these ironclad ships. And in the end, the Chinese are forced to surrender, and they're going to give the British access to the island of Hong Kong so that they can have trade there in Hong Kong, which is down here by Canton. And this is also going to open China up to foreign intervention, where before the Opium War, China was pretty self-sufficient, as we mentioned before, and they had a lot of control over who was able to trade with them. But by the British humiliating the Chinese in this war, especially as the underdogs, is going to set the tone where now pretty much any country can come in and push around the Chinese now that the rest of the world sees how militarily and technologically inferior the Chinese are compared to the European powers. This is going to kick off a whole series, and there are other Chinese issues going on here during this time, but the Opium Wars are really going to kick off some of these bigger issues. The Chinese population grew to 430 million by 1850, but food production had plateaued, causing famine and many people to go hungry. We're going to have a rebellion by the Chinese called the Taiping Rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion is intending to kind of like overthrow or modify the government to remove external threats, such as the British, the Germans, the French, the Americans, anybody that's interfering in China as a whole. By the end, 20 million people are going to be killed, which is a pretty ridiculous number. But China has this massive population, so to them, 20 million is still a lot of people, but not world-ending. Versus, I mean, there are some countries today that don't even have 20 million people, and so within the perspective there and the context there, it's a pretty serious step backwards for China. Sensing weakness from the Chinese, first from the Opium Wars and then from this instability of the Taiping Rebellion, foreign nations are going to chip away at China with a variety of wars and treaties. These are going to set up things called spheres of influence. Spheres of influence is an area in which a foreign nation controls trade and investments. So on the map on the right, you can see the different spheres of influence from different countries such as France, England, Germany, Japan, and Russia to the north. And with spheres of influence, the territory that they control is still technically Chinese, it's still legally Chinese, but the trade and the economy of that region is influenced heavily by these European powers. And so this is a step towards imperialism without turning China into a direct colony of the imperial powers. The US, fearing being blocked out from the lucrative and valuable trade in China, is going to issue something called the open door policy to keep China open to merchants from all nations so they don't get boxed out. This is going to be a good step for everyone who isn't China. China is still subservient to all these foreign nations, but at least all the other nations that are exploiting China pretty ruthlessly, they're all free to do so. So this is like, various groups of bandits trying to break in and rob your house, and they all agree that they'll all break in and rob your house equally, but they're not going to consult you or protect your rights while doing so. So kind of comparable there. These steps and these events and these humiliations are going to force China to kind of overcorrect and try to overcorrect and overcompensate. This is going to lead to a strong sense of nationalism of the Chinese now that the others of Europeans and the Americans and the Japanese are very clearly established to be no friend to the Chinese people or the government. And the Chinese people are going to embrace that idea and start to push against any foreigners that are meddling in China. This is going to lead to something called the Boxer Rebellion, another interesting conflict from Chinese and world history. These were mostly Chinese peasants and working class individuals who rose up against the Chinese government, most out of frustration for the Chinese government's inability to protect the Chinese people from these foreigners, but also the foreigners themselves. Chinese Christians in particular are going to be targeted because Christian being a European influence, the traditionalist Chinese nationalists are going to target and kill many, many Chinese nationalists and any foreigners they can get their hands on. The Chinese rebels are going to march to Beijing, lay siege to the European part of the city for months, but the Europeans with their superior weaponry are going to be able to hold off the Chinese mob until a multinational army, which is kind of cool from the world history perspective, where you have Japanese soldiers, Russian soldiers, British soldiers, French soldiers, US Marines and soldiers, all coming together to form an army to defeat the Chinese. And again, at China's expense, the world kind of comes together. And so it's really unfortunate for China, but hey, it's at least showing that all these people from other countries can work together when it comes to abusing another nation. So emphasis there on multinational, which is kind of cool to everyone who's not Chinese here. The Chinese government decided that they needed dramatic reform as a result of the Boxer Rebellion, because again, they're just being pushed around, and the European and foreigners are able to do whatever they want, whenever they want in China. The Chinese are going to send observers around the world to learn from the Europeans that are abusing them, to hopefully make some changes to better the lot for Chinese individuals. These ambassadors are going to return. They're going to recommend a constitutional monarchy similar to Japan's government. And change is going to be initiated, but it's going to be slow and arduous and often interrupted by internal rebellions, internal mutinies and problems, as well as external crises with European and foreign nations gobbling up parts of China or expanding their spheres of influence. And in particular, a rising imperial nation called Japan starting to assert their dominance over what used to be their big brother in their relationship. So if we're going to backtrack a little bit to when the Europeans first started coming to Asia, let's go ahead and talk about Japan. In the early 17th century, after about 100 or so years of trading with the Europeans, especially the Portuguese, the Japanese are going to close their border and they're going to go into an isolationist mode. They're going to shut their doors, lock their doors, and not really let any foreigners into Japan. And they're going to kind of hide off the coast of China and just do their own thing. In the 19th century, so about 300 or so years, the American Commodore Matthew Perry is going to come to Japan with a fleet of warships, and he's going to intimidate the Japanese pretty shadily also. He's going to intimidate the Japanese into opening ports to U.S. trade. This is going to initiate some rebellions in Japan where the Japanese people, much like the Chinese people, were frustrated with their government for not having more of a backbone with the Europeans. Japanese are doing the same thing. There's going to be some internal conflict as the two sides fight about whether the government did the right thing by opening up Japan against its will or not. Emperor Mutsuhito, he's going to take the name Meiji during his reign, and he's going to initiate a series of reforms that we now refer to as the Meiji Restoration or the Meiji era. So this is going to be a pretty defining moment and series of events here for Japanese history. Meiji, or Mutsuhito, he's going to quickly realize that the best way to defeat the foreigners, defeat the Europeans, who again were technologically far advanced versus the Japanese, was to learn from them and adapt to their way of life. So if you can't beat them, you join them. And that's what Meiji is going to do with Japan. The Japanese are going to send ambassadors and envoys across Europe and North America to study other government societies, bringing back different tips and tools and trades and knowledge to help reform Japan. The Japanese are going to attempt to imitate the German central government army, because the German army at this time was considered to be one of the best in the world. And for the Navy, they're going to adapt the British Navy, who the British historically had a superior navy to most navies in the world. And for public schooling, they're going to copy the American system. So at least from 19th century American public schools, it was good enough for the Japanese, even though it still had a ways to go to where we are today. The Meiji Restoration is going to be a time of radical change in not just the society and the culture, but also the economy of Japan, with factories springing up left and right, mines being dug for coal for the factories, as well as miles and miles and miles of railroads being built to industrialize this country in a way that no country really had been able to do before. With the Europeans, with their industrialization, it took quite some time and lots of steps to get there, but the Japanese were able to see what they did, copy their notes, and effectively do it in a fanatical way and get it done as quickly as possible. All of these developments combined are going to lead to a very modern Japan, at least within the modern context, pretty much overnight, historically speaking, in a very rapid rate. With a powerful army and modern warships, they're going to reassert their dominance in Asia and world politics. They're going to remove foreign influences from within Japan by showing, hey, like, we copied you, we're pretty much one of you, so you don't really need to babysit or manipulate us, and we're going to do what we need to do. This is going to lead to Japan now wanting to use their modern military and to become one of the world powers, because this is during the age of imperialism, where if you are a nation of any worth, you have a colony. Somewhere a colony, you have an imperial control, you have an empire, and Japan is like, hey, if we want to be one of the big guys, we need to have an empire as well. This is going to kick off the Sino-Japanese War, Sino being one of the root words for China, or at least within the context of historians. So the Sino-Japanese War is going to be between China and Japan. This is interesting, where historically speaking, China was always Japan's little brother, and there was usually peace between the two. But now that Japan has risen from the ranks, he's ascended from the being on par with China, and now they're going to try to beat up on China just like everybody else. This war takes place almost exclusively in Korea. So if this is Japan over here off the coast of China, this is China over here, Korea being in the middle. So Japan is trying to gain access to natural resources, mostly because they don't have as many themselves. They're a pretty small island, And if they're going to be industrial, they need coal and iron ore and all kinds of different chemicals and minerals to build their empire. And Korea has enough resources to scratch that itch. And so Japan is looking to gain the natural resources of Korea to help continue to fuel their industry. The Russo-Japanese War in 1904. This is a conflict between the Russians and the Japanese, where the Russians are also trying to maintain influence over Korea and the coastal region around Japan. Japan, again, wants to assert their dominance and show that they're a big kid. And Japan is going to execute a surprise naval attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur, which is right here on the map on the, let's see if I can do this with how small it is. There, somewhere in there. Sorry, it's too small. So this guy right here. This is a surprise naval attack that's going to look similar to Pearl Harbor, except with more boats than airplanes. And this is going to be a pretty routine tool in the Japanese naval toolkit. The Russians are going to be defeated, and the Japanese are going to claim territory after territory, kicking the Russians out of Manchuria, which is the region north of Korea, therefore solidifying their control over East Asia and bringing them closer to more conflict with China. Korea was then invaded by the Japanese themselves, who annexed Korea officially, making it part of their colony, where before they just had a sphere of influence. Now Korea is officially part of the Japanese Empire. The Japanese, as rulers with the Koreans, were harsh. For people who study World War II, this is kind of a similar, you're going to see a similar vein of fanaticism from the part of the conquerors. Some things that the Japanese did to the Koreans was they shut down Korean newspapers so that the Koreans couldn't have that academic sharing and that culture. They're going to take over Korean schools and force Korean students to learn Japanese language and history, therefore trying to eliminate Korean culture as a whole with the young people so that they would grow up learning Japanese and considering themselves part of Japan because that's what they were taught. The Japanese are going to take land away from the Koreans and give it to Japanese settlers. So you're truly colonizing, where you're taking land from the locals and giving it to people that are of Japanese descent to spread Japanese ideals and power. And they're going to force the Korean people to learn Japanese language and take Japanese names. And there are a series of pretty good books about this experience. I'm blanking on the name of the one I read when I was studying this area in college. I think it's called Forgotten Names, but I'll have to double check that one and get back to you guys in class. But yeah, really scary stuff going on with the Japanese trying to kind of do a cultural genocide of the Korean people that they were ruling over. So that's your quick overview of how China and Japan are going to react to the European imperialists differently. China really failed to adapt in any meaningful way until it was far too late. Their lack of interest in trading is going to lead to some negative consequences, with Britain kind of forcing their way in and making things worse for China. Japan, on the other hand, was very isolationist. They did a good job of keeping the Europeans out, but once they were opened up by Commodore Perry from the United States, they are going to quickly realize that they need to modernize, and they are going to copy and adapt and improve upon what the Europeans and the Americans were doing to create their own foundation for an empire that they are then going to use to expand into Korea and Manchuria and start to assert their dominance in that region that we will see continue through World War I. And then in World War II, when the Japanese imperialists are going to finally butt their head against the United States, and we're going to have some pretty catastrophic conflicts there. So I think that's all I need to cover with you guys today. Hopefully I was able to get through all that information in a speedy enough manner. If you guys have any questions, be sure to hit me up in class. You guys should have my email on the syllabus. Let me know if you guys have any questions, and I will see you guys in class where we can discuss this in more detail. So that's all I have for now. I'm going to go ahead and sign out. Mr. Long, over and out.